There's a country that spent most of its history not existing. For over 1,000 years, the boot-shaped peninsula sticking out into the Mediterranean was a chaotic patchwork of kingdoms, republics, duchies, and territories that spent their free time invading each other, betraying each other, and absolutely refusing to agree on anything. Italy as a nation didn't exist until 1861, which means that every single time someone tells you about authentic Italian cuisine, they're describing a country younger than the bicycle. And here's the part that's going to ruin dinner forever. There is no such thing as Italian food. There never was. What you think of as Italian cooking is actually dozens of fiercely independent regional cuisines that have been at war with each other for centuries, and the only thing they've ever fully agreed on is that everyone else is doing it wrong. Let me explain what I mean, because this is where it gets ridiculous. Imagine a family. A big, loud family, the kind where everyone loves each other deeply and would also genuinely consider ending a relationship over the correct shape of a noodle. That's Italy. That's the whole thing. Because the peninsula was carved up for over a millennium into territories that barely spoke the same language, the food didn't develop as one cuisine. It developed as 20 cuisines that happened to share a passport, and the passport only showed up 160 years ago. For most of history, a person from Venice and a person from Palermo had less in common than a Londoner and a Spaniard do today. Different rulers, different invaders, different crops, different money, and food that reflected all of it. The idea that you could draw a circle around the whole thing and call it one cuisine would have struck them as not just wrong, but insulting. So before we even touch a single dish, you need to understand the fault line that runs straight down the middle of this country like a crack in a plate. The Great Divide. North versus South. And it's not about politics or accents, it's about fat. Specifically, what kind of fat you cook with, which is somehow the most heated topic in the entire nation. The North is colder, richer, historically wealthier, and it spent centuries rubbing shoulders with Austria, Hungary, and France, picking up habits along the way. So the North cooks with butter. Glorious, golden, unapologetic butter. The North makes risotto, because rice grows beautifully in the flooded plains of the Po Valley. The North eats polenta, that creamy cornmeal that kept entire populations alive through brutal winters. The North makes fresh pasta with egg, soft and yellow, rolled out by hand by a grandmother who has been doing it since before you were born, and who will judge you silently if you buy it from a shop. Up there you'll find dishes drenched in cheese and cream and slow-braised meat, food built for cold mornings and long winters, food that has more in common with the Alps than with the Mediterranean postcard you're picturing. The South is a different planet. Sun-baked, historically poor, dramatically beautiful, and built on the Mediterranean. The South cooks with olive oil, because olive trees thrive in that heat, and butter would have been a luxury nobody could afford. The South makes dry pasta from durum wheat semolina, the kind that comes in hard golden bundles and lasts forever. The South builds its food around tomatoes, seafood, vegetables, and the kind of intense flavor that comes from people who learn to make magic out of almost nothing. This is the cuisine of necessity turned into art, of grandmothers who could feed a family of 8 on a few cents worth of ingredients and make it taste like heaven. Butter versus oil. Remember that. Because that single split explains more about Italian food than any recipe ever could. And if you want to start a fight at a dinner table that stretches from Milan to Naples, just casually suggest that one of them is better than the other, and then quietly leave the room. Because the truth nobody says out loud is that this isn't a difference of taste, it's a difference of history. The rich North and the poor South ate differently because they lived differently, and centuries later, on a plate, you can still taste the wealth gap. Now, here's where I have to break some news that genuinely upsets people. That tomato. The tomato you think of as the very soul of Italy, the red beating heart of every pasta, sauce, the thing that practically is Italian food in your imagination. It's an immigrant. The tomato is not Italian. The tomato came from the Americas in the 16th century, and when it first arrived, Italians did not greet it with open arms and a pot of boiling water. They thought it was decorative, a pretty little ornamental plant. Some of them genuinely believed it was poisonous and refused to eat it for the better part of 200 years. Let that sink in. The defining ingredient of Italian cooking, the thing nobody can imagine the cuisine without, spent its first couple of centuries in Italy being treated like a suspicious houseplant. The tomato sauce that defines the entire global image of this country is, in the grand sweep of history, a relatively recent arrival. Which means that if you went back to medieval Italy and asked for spaghetti with marinara, you would have received a blank stare and possibly an exorcism. The whole red saucy image you have of Italian food, the thing that feels ancient and eternal, is more recent than you'd ever believe. For most of Italian history, the food was beige, green, and brown. The Technicolor version is the new kid. And while we're demolishing myths, let's deal with the big one, the pasta one. You've heard the story. Marco Polo, brave explorer, sails to China, discovers noodles, brings them home to Italy, and boom, pasta is born. It's a beautiful story. It's also complete nonsense. A marketing fabrication invented in the 20th century, possibly by an American pasta company, to sell more product. Pasta existed in the Mediterranean long before Marco Polo was even a twinkle in his ancestors' eyes. The Arabs brought dried pasta techniques to Sicily centuries earlier, which is exactly why the South, with all that durum wheat and Arab influence, became the heartland of the dry pasta that conquered the world. Marco Polo brought back a lot of things. Spaghetti was not one of them. Stop telling people that. You're embarrassing yourself at parties. Okay, now that we've burned the myths to the ground, let's actually start eating, because this is where the real bloodshed begins. Carbonara. Sacred, holy, untouchable carbonara. There is no dish on earth defended with more violence and less mercy. Real carbonara, Roman carbonara, the only carbonara that the universe will permit, contains exactly 4 things. Eggs, guanciale, which is cured pork cheek, not bacon, not pancetta, do not even start, pecorino, cheese, and black pepper. That's it, that's the entire cathedral. The silky, glossy sauce comes purely from eggs and cheese and starchy pasta water emulsified together by someone who knows what they're doing. And then there's the rest of the world, cheerfully dumping cream into the pan like absolute barbarians. Cream in carbonara. To an Italian, and specifically to a Roman, putting cream in carbonara is not a culinary variation. It is a personal attack. It is an act of war. There are people in Rome who would more readily forgive you for insulting their mother than for adding cream to a carbonara, and honestly, the mother thing might be more recoverable. The French do it. The Americans do it. Half of Northern Europe does it. And every single time, somewhere in Rome, a grandmother feels a disturbance in the force and doesn't know why she's suddenly angry. Add peas, and it gets worse. Add mushrooms, and you've started a regional incident. Add chicken, and you may not be allowed back into the country. But here's the funny part, the part nobody wants to admit. Carbonara is barely older than your grandparents. There's no record of it before the 20th century. The dish that is defended like an ancient sacred scroll, handed down from the Romans, was probably invented sometime around the Second World War. And some people think it was even inspired by American soldiers and their rations of eggs and bacon. The thing they treat like a 1,000-year-old commandment is younger than rude huv, sliced bread, and may have been born from the very people they now scream at for ruining it. But you will never, ever say that out loud in Rome. Not if you value your life. Some lies are load-bearing, which brings us, almost inevitably, to its angry cousin. Because if carbonara is the dish people fight over, the next one is the dish that doesn't even exist, and yet somehow the entire planet eats it constantly. Spaghetti Bolognese, the most famous Italian dish that is not Italian. Walk into a restaurant in Bologna, the actual city of Bologna, the place the dish is supposedly named after, and ask for spaghetti bolognese, and you will be looked at the way you'd look at someone ordering a cheeseburger at a funeral. It does not exist there. It is not a thing. The Bolognese will tell you, with the patient exhaustion of people who have explained this 10,000 times, that what you're thinking of is ragu alla bolognese, a rich, slow-cooked meat sauce that they would never, under any circumstances, serve with spaghetti. They serve it with tagliatelle, flat, wide, fresh egg pasta that actually holds the heavy sauce because thin, round spaghetti lets it all slide off pathetically into the bottom of the bowl. The shape matters. The shape is everything. In Italy, pasta shape is not a suggestion, it's a science, and matching the wrong sauce to the wrong shape is the kind of thing that ends conversations. To them, spaghetti bolognese is a foreign invention, a bizarre thing tourists believe in like a culinary unicorn that escaped from a British pub menu and conquered the world. And the worst part, from their perspective, is that it's everywhere. It's the most popular Italian dish on earth, and it's not even real. Imagine being famous for something you didn't do and don't even like. Speaking of things that drive Italians up the wall, this feels like a reasonable moment to mention that if you're enjoying this slow-motion food fight, you can hit that like button and subscribe. I know, terribly intrusive of me, right in the middle of a war over noodle shapes. But think of it this way, you've already taken a side on the cream and carbonara debate, whether you meant to or not, so you're emotionally invested now. There's no going back. Might as well make it official. Anyway, where were we? Ah yes, the pizza wars. Pizza. You think you know pizza. You don't know pizza. Because to the city of Naples, pizza is not food, it's a birthright, and they have the paperwork to prove it. True Neapolitan pizza, pizza napolitana, is protected by actual rules, written down, enforced, taken deadly seriously. The dough can only be certain flour, water, salt, and yeast. It has to be worked by hand. It cooks in a screaming hot wood-fired oven for about 90 seconds, which produces that soft, floppy, slightly charred, gloriously chaotic center that you absolutely cannot eat without a fork and knife, no matter how much you'd like to. And the original, the one that started it all, is shockingly simple: the margherita. Tomato, mozzarella, basil, olive oil, red, white, and green, supposedly created to honor a queen and match the Italian flag, though even that story might be a charming bit of invention. Doesn't matter. The Neapolitans believe it, and that's what counts, because to them, everything else, the thick crusts, the loaded toppings, the pineapple, oh, the pineapple, is a crime against the natural order of things. Pineapple on pizza in Naples isn't a topping, it's a provocation. You might as well walk in waving a flag that says, "I have never respected anything." And don't get them started on what happens to pizza once it crosses an ocean. The cheese-stuffed crust, the ranch dressing, the toppings stacked so high the dough surrenders. To a Neapolitan, it's not pizza anymore, it's a wound. And yet, here's the thing nobody likes to say. Most of the pizza eaten on planet Earth bears almost no resemblance to the Neapolitan original, and people love it anyway. The deep dish in Chicago, which is essentially a savory pie wearing a pizza costume. The thin, crispy squares, the folded New York slice you eat walking down the street. The Neapolitans look at all of it with a mix of horror and pity, and the rest of the world just keeps eating, blissfully unbothered. Because deliciousness, it turns out, does not require a certificate. There's something almost poetic about it. The thing they guard most jealously is the thing that escaped, mutated, and became the most popular food on the planet without their permission. Now let me tell you about a dish that exists in restaurants all over America and is functionally a ghost in Italy: fettuccine Alfredo. That creamy, cheesy, heavy bowl of comfort that shows up on every Italian-American menu from coast to coast. In Italy, almost nobody has heard of it. The real story is almost insultingly simple. A guy named Alfredo in Rome made pasta with just butter and Parmesan, tossed together so the cheese and starch made a light, glossy coating. That's it, pasta al burro, butter pasta. The kind of thing an Italian mother makes for a sick child who can't stomach anything heavier. Then American tourists tasted it, fell in love, took it home, and somewhere along the way it mutated into a tidal wave of cream and butter and garlic powder that an actual Roman wouldn't recognize as food, let alone as their dish. The thing Americans treat as a luxurious Italian classic is, in Italy, basically what you eat when you have a fever. The glow-up that crossed the Atlantic is genuinely one of the great culinary transformations in history, and Italians find it baffling that anyone pays restaurant prices for what their grandmother considers emergency baby food. It's the culinary version of a quiet, shy kid moving to a new school and reinventing himself as the most popular person in town, while back home, nobody can even remember his name. And this constant gap between what's authentic and what the world thinks is authentic is the real spine of this whole story. Because the deeper you go, the more you realize the entire Italian approach to food is governed by an invisible rulebook that nobody wrote down but everybody enforces. Here's the philosophy, and it's almost the opposite of what people expect. Italian cooking is not about complexity. It's not about fancy techniques or 20-ingredient sauces or showing off. It's about obsession with ingredients. The whole religion is built on getting the best possible tomato, the best olive oil, the freshest fish, the cheese made the right way, at the right time of year, in the right place, and then doing as little as humanly possible to it. Simplicity is the flex. A perfect dish of pasta with 3 ingredients, made flawlessly, beats a complicated mess every single time. The respect for the ingredient borders on the religious, and the respect for the traditional recipe goes well past it. An Italian chef will happily tell you that the hardest thing in the world to cook is the simplest dish, because when there's nothing to hide behind, every single ingredient has to be perfect. Which is why the unwritten rules exist, and why breaking them feels like sacrilege. Do not break the spaghetti before you cook it. Just don't. Snapping a handful of dry spaghetti in half so it fits in your pot is, to many Italians, the kind of thing they'd report to the authorities, if there were authorities for this. Long strand is the point. You twirl it. You learn. You suffer if you must. You do not break it. There are famous stories of Italian chefs physically wincing on camera when a guest reaches for the spaghetti to snap it, the way you'd react to someone scratching a chalkboard. Do not put cheese on seafood, ever. The combination of Parmesan and anything from the ocean is considered a fundamental error, a clashing of two worlds that should never meet. Ask for Parmesan on your seafood pasta in Italy, and the waiter's soul will visibly leave his body. He'll bring it if you insist, but he will never look at you the same way, and frankly, neither will the kitchen. The logic is that strong cheese drowns the delicate flavor of the seafood, but really, by this point, the rule has outlived its reasoning. It's just law now. It's just how things are. And the cappuccino. Oh, the cappuccino. A cappuccino is a morning drink, full stop. All that milk is considered far too heavy to drink after a meal, where it supposedly wrecks your digestion. Order a cappuccino after, say, 12 o'clock, and especially after dinner, and you have instantly and permanently marked yourself as a tourist. Italians drink an espresso after meals. Quick, dark, standing up at the bar, gone in seconds. The cappuccino after dinner is the culinary equivalent of wearing socks with sandals. Nobody will stop you, everybody will know. And while we're here, no, they don't drink it out of giant paper buckets the size of their heads either. An Italian coffee is small, intense, and finished in about 3 sips before you go on with your life. These rules aren't really about food. That's the thing. They're about identity. They're a way of saying, I belong here and you don't, encoded into the order of your beverages. And nowhere does that link between food and identity get more intense than in the world of protected products, where Italy basically turned geography into law. Because here's something most people don't realize. A huge number of the most famous Italian products are legally protected, meaning they can only be made in one specific place, by specific rules, or they are not allowed to use the name. Take Parmigiano Reggiano. Real Parmesan can only come from a few designated provinces around Parma and Reggio Emilia. That hard, salty, granular green can of Parmesan in your supermarket? That's not Parmigiano Reggiano. It's a sad cousin wearing a name tag that lawyers in Italy would very much like to discuss with you. The real thing is aged for years, stamped, inspected, and treated like a financial asset, which it literally is. Banks in the region accept wheels of Parmesan as collateral on loans. You read that correctly. The cheese is so valuable and so reliable that you can borrow money against it. There are climate-controlled vaults full of cheese guarded like gold, because in a very real sense, that's exactly what it is. Then there's balsamic vinegar from Modena. The real, traditional stuff is aged for years, sometimes decades, in a series of wooden barrels, until it's thick and dark and syrupy and costs as much as good perfume. The brown watery stuff you splash on salads bears about as much relation to it as a paper airplane does to a fighter jet. Families pass barrels of it down through generations, and a barrel set started for a newborn might not be touched until they're grown. Prosciutto di Parma, the cured ham, can only come from a specific area where the breezes and the climate cure it just right, and it's stamped with a crown to prove it. Mozzarella di Bufala Campana, made from the milk of water buffalo in the Campania region, soft and milky and nothing like the rubbery blocks sold elsewhere under the same general name. And the reason for all of this, the reason a country will pass laws about where a cheese can be born, is the thing that ties this entire chaotic story together. In Italy, food is not separate from place. The food is the place. The ham tastes like the air of Parma. The cheese tastes like the grass those specific cows ate. The wine tastes like the particular hill it grew on. To make these products somewhere else, with different air and different grass and different soil, would produce something else entirely, no matter how closely you followed the recipe. It would be a copy of a painting, technically the same image, completely missing the soul. So when these regions fight, and they fight constantly, about whose recipe is correct and who's allowed to make what and whether your grandmother's method is heresy, they're not really arguing about food. They're arguing about who they are. The Sicilian and the Venetian eat completely different things because they come from completely different worlds that only recently got stapled together into one country. The pasta is different, the fat is different, the attitude is different, and every single one of them is utterly convinced that their way is the right way, the original way, the only way, and everyone else is either confused or actively malicious. A village will insist its version of a dish is the true one, and the village down the road has been butchering it for generations, and the village down the road feels exactly the same way in reverse. And the strangest, most beautiful part of all of this is that the constant disagreement is the point. The whole thing works precisely because nobody agrees on anything. There is no central Italian cookbook that everyone follows. There's no committee that decided what Italian food is. It's 1,000 local arguments happening at once, each one fueled by pride and history and the absolute certainty that the village 20 minutes away is doing it wrong. The chaos isn't a bug. It's the entire operating system. Take away the arguing, and the whole thing would collapse, because the arguing is how the traditions stay alive. Every fight over a recipe is somebody refusing to let their grandmother's way of doing things disappear. So the next time someone offers you authentic Italian food, you've got a decision to make. You can nod politely, or you can ask them which Italy they mean, the buttery north or the olive oil south. The Rome that would die before putting cream in carbonara, or the Bologna that doesn't believe spaghetti bolognese is real. The Naples that has laws about pizza, or the rest of the planet happily ignoring them. Because there was never one Italian cuisine. There's a peninsula, full of regions that spent 1,000 years apart, learned to make extraordinary food out of whatever the land and the sea and their poverty gave them, and then got handed a single flag in 1861 and told to call themselves one thing. They never quite agreed to it. They still don't. They're still arguing about the noodles. And the food, that impossible, glorious, fiercely defended food, only tastes the way it does because none of them will ever back down. The tomato's still technically an immigrant. The carbonara's younger than your grandfather. And somewhere right now, a man in Naples is watching someone reach for the pineapple, and he is not okay. If you enjoyed this, you know what to do. And whatever you do, don't break the spaghetti.